Folks, you agree with me, I'm sure. Enough is enough is enough. We have to stand up. I don't want to hear about, well, we can't take it on because it's too politically dangerous. The world has changed. The American public has changed.
That was Vice President Joe Biden speaking about the obligation for stricter gun laws in the wake of the Newtown Elementary School shooting. Good evening and welcome to this Reality Check special. Tonight we're talking about the issue of gun control. It's an issue that's captured headlines across the nation for about 2 months now. Shortly after the Sandy Hook shooting, in which 20 children died along with 6 adults, President Obama put VP Joe Biden in charge of a task force to come up with solutions so that tragedies like Sandy Hook would never happen again. Biden has met with the NRA, law enforcement, the entertainment industry, school districts, and many more, which is partly why he grabbed headlines this week when he was caught off camera saying this.
What we're going to do is going to fundamentally alter or eliminate the possibility of another mass shooting or guarantee that we will bring gun deaths down to 1,000 a year from what it is now.
That statement is fairly interesting because it was on February 3rd when Biden was caught saying that these measures may not change anything when it comes to gun violence. It was also on the 6th of February, 3 days later, when he was in front of the crowds, once again saying enough is enough. Just a few days after the Sandy Hook shooting, we posed the question, do gun control laws really have to do with gun control? Here's a look back at that reality check. In the days after the Connecticut school shooting, there's been a lot of talk about the need for gun control laws to be more strict across the nation. And this is a highly charged issue. Some say stricter laws would protect the innocent, and others say it would do nothing but take guns away from law-abiding citizens. Tonight, we investigate the numbers in a reality check you won't see anywhere else. The language being used by gun control advocates, politicians, and many in the national media all sounds the same. We need to get angry about what happened in Connecticut. We must take serious action, they say, to prevent this from ever happening again. One of the toughest issues here is to separate the emotion from fact, because it's easy to be angry at guns. But does that anger make sense? To be angry at the tool and not the user. Do you know how many gun-related deaths we have in America each year? According to the FBI's number for 2011, which is the last number where numbers are available, there were 12,664 murders in the U.S. Of those, 8,583 were caused by firearms, which means that 4,081 were committed without a firearm. Now let's stick to the numbers of firearm deaths. Nearly 8,600 murders committed with a firearm in 2011. Now, the thinking is that if there were stricter gun laws, these 8,600 deaths, or many of them at least, would have been prevented. But is that true? Well, not necessarily. While guns are the most common tool used for murder, the second most common are knives and cutting objects. And the third, believe it or not, are fists and feet. But there is a bigger issue here. If guns are so dangerous of a tool that society must rid itself of them, is that true of other dangerous tools? While there are under 8,600 gun-related murders in the United States for 2011, there are over 11,000 drunk driving-related deaths, according to the New York Times. That means 2,500 more people are dying at the hands of drunk drivers than guns. So where's the outrage from Piers Morgan of CNN about legal alcohol for those drunk drivers? Where are the calls from Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York to have a serious debate about banning cars? After all, there are 38,000 traffic deaths in the country every year. Well, what this means for you is that no one is going to move to take your car away, because people will say, well, cars and guns, it's apples and oranges. After all, you need a car to get around, but you don't need a gun. Cars serve many purposes, but guns, they say, serve only one. That argument is not only untrue, but it serves to demonstrate the difference in worldview. Those who are calling for a ban on assault weapons and handguns are doing so because they believe that the greater good in society will be served by removing guns, even though the numbers show the greater good would be better served by removing all cars. The argument over guns isn't really over guns at all. It's over whether or not the individual in America has rights. Rights to speech, rights to property, rights to keep and bear arms. We hear a lot about sovereign states these days, but the truth is, in the eyes of the founders, You are the sovereign. You have rights that no society, no government, and even the greater good cannot take away from you. And that is Reality Check.
Still ahead, guns and violent crime make national headlines. But could conceal and carry permits help reduce the bloodshed? We'll investigate Ohio's numbers. Still ahead.
When people tell me that you can't prevent these kinds of occurrences, that doesn't mean we can't do something to, God forbid if it happens again, diminish the carnage. It matters. It matters.
And that was Vice President Joe Biden making a pitch to Democrats in Congress. Biden attempting to rally lawmakers behind President Obama's gun violence proposals during a retreat Wednesday evening. Now, Biden has been charged to lead a task force that President Obama is calling on to help reduce gun violence. Chances are that commission will not come back with a recommendation for more concealed carry permits as part of the answer. But should they? A few weeks ago, we investigated Ohio's concealed carry numbers. Here's a look back at that reality check. The debate over gun control is not new, but there is newer data that may show a direct correlation between concealed carry weapons and a drop in crime. Let's talk about the state of Ohio. I looked up the numbers on crime statistics from 1960 to 2011. Now, these stats give raw numbers, but what is surprising in those numbers is that between 2003 and 2011, even though the population rises for the state of Ohio every year but one, crime is steadily on the decline. So why take the years 2003 to 2011? Because it was in April of 2004 when Ohio passed its concealed carry law. So back to the crime numbers. In 2003, the year before CCWs were issued, there were 526 murders in Ohio, compared to 479 in 2010 and 513 in 2011. Forcible rapes, they were at 4,660 in 2003. But since the concealed carry permits began being issued, those numbers have dropped every single year but one. In 2011, there were 1,029 fewer rapes than in 2003. Aggravated robberies, well, those are also steadily on the decline. In 2003, 16,895 aggravated robberies. In 2011, 16,057. That's a difference of 838 aggravated robberies. Now, we could go on, but suffice to say, crime is down in every single category in Ohio except for one, burglary, where property is stolen from a home or a business. Now, what these stats do not say definitively is whether or not the concealed carry weapons are the reason for the drop. It is true the surge in permits issued does correlate to the drop in crime, and yet there's no way to know for sure what other factors could play a role. Okay, but even if concealed carry permits might be helping to lower crime, the president's task force is designed to prevent mass shooting tragedies. Can concealed weapons stop that? Well, maybe. A week ago, 22-year-old Jacob Tyler Roberts walked into the Clackamas Town Center Mall just outside of Portland, Oregon. Roberts was armed with an AR-15 rifle and he opened fire inside the mall. He killed 2 people and wounded a third before taking his own life. Now, what most of the media has not told you is why Roberts killed only 2 people before killing himself. Portland TV station KGW has reported that another 22-year-old was in the mall at the same time. Nick Mealy, who has a concealed carry permit, was nearby when Roberts opened fire. Mealy pulled his weapon. He aimed it at the shooter, but he didn't shoot the gunman because there were bystanders who could have been injured. He told this to the TV station, quote, "I'm not beating myself up because I didn't shoot him," said Mealy. "I know after he saw me, the last shot he fired was the one he used to kill himself." So what this means for you is that while the rise in concealed carry permits is increasing in Ohio, violent crime is not. And while media and politicians are demanding a serious debate on gun control, it is fair to ask, shouldn't a serious debate look at these kinds of numbers and ask whether more guns in the hands of responsible Americans is part of the answer? And that is Reality Check.
Still ahead, the president has big plans for tighter gun control laws. But will they be enforced? Why some local sheriffs won't be following presidential orders. Still ahead.
President of the United States is, our boss. But he's also, the the president and the first lady are kind of like the mom and the dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen. And when you don't, it usually bites you in the ass later on.
Well, welcome back to this reality check special on gun control. Comedian Chris Rock explaining President Obama, he says, is the dad of the nation. When he calls for stricter gun control, the rest of the country should listen. Not sure who he's talking to there, but there are well over 200 county sheriffs across the country who have said they will not fall into line with any executive order from the president that violates the Second Amendment. Here's a look at that reality check. Well, there is one group of law enforcement who have been very vocal about the president's calls for tighter gun control laws, along with his 23 executive directives signed about 2 weeks ago. That group of law enforcement, county sheriffs from across the country. In fact, there are now 228 county sheriffs across the nation and a number of sheriff associations that have come out vowing to defend the Constitution. In order to do that, they say they will not enforce any federal law that violates the Second Amendment rights of the people in their counties. That list includes sheriffs from Washington, Alabama, Utah, New Mexico, Texas, Florida, California, Kentucky, Ohio, just to name a few. In fact, it is a sheriff from Kentucky who says he was the first to make this stand that seems to have rapidly spread across the nation. He is Sheriff Denny Payman from Jackson County, Kentucky, and he spoke with me by phone.
Signed a letter. I was actually the first sheriff to make a stand, and about 3 days later is when our Oregon sheriff did, and then some others followed with that. The way it's been kind of displayed is these are suggestions that we'll talk about, but then it's all of a sudden gone to, no, these are what we're going to enforce. Well, they're not going to be enforced here.
Now, we went through that list of President Obama's 23 executive orders on guns, and the reality is most of them are simply memos to federal agencies about giving instruction, which, in fairness, is exactly what an executive order is supposed to consist of. From what we can tell, the list of 23 does not really include any new laws on guns via executive order, which is what Sheriff Payman says he is looking out for.
This is my feeling, okay, and I believe I'm on the right track. Is what they're doing. They're trying to find a soft spot. They're trying to crack the door. Okay, well, if they'll accept that, let's chip away at that amendment a little bit. I know the people of my county well enough. I know the people that still have basically a patriotic blood that runs through them and that still stand on the Constitution. And I'm not going to disarm those people. These are the good citizens. These are the people that are trying to protect each other and themselves. And to disarm one of them is why the Second Amendment was created. But to have the federal people don't have business in here doing that. They cannot walk in and disarm people in Jackson County.
So what this means for you, for those of you in Ohio and Kentucky, 2 county sheriffs have made this commitment in Ohio, 6 in Kentucky. That includes the sheriffs of Boone, Kenton, and Claremont counties. Sheriff Payman says the reason for the pledge is simple. At the end of the day, the sheriff says it is his oath of office to protect the people of his county. And he says that happens in part by protecting the constitutional rights of the people living in his county. And that is Reality Check.
Still ahead, the battle over gun control continues to heat up. The Second Amendment explained. And why do you need to own an AR-15? Still ahead.
I know the Second Amendment. What I haven't heard is one coherent reason why any civilian in America needs an AR-15 military-style assault weapon.
That is CNN host Piers Morgan asking a question that he has asked now for several weeks. Why does anyone, regardless of the Second Amendment, need an AR-15 rifle? I want to try to answer that question in just a moment, but first a look back at a reality check that explains the origins of the Second Amendment. Over gun control is something making headlines all over the country. For the past week, Reality Check has looked at the numbers behind gun control and crime rates. But tonight, we're looking at the Second Amendment, the intention behind it, and what the founders might think about the gun debate today. This is a Reality Check you won't see anywhere else. The discussion over gun control in light of the Connecticut school shooting has been building over the past week. Among the claims made that the Second Amendment was meant for hunting at a time when people use muskets. So we begin tonight with what the Second Amendment says. Quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. To be clear, the militia is not regular military. They were farmers and blacksmiths who went about their daily lives. But notice that the amendment says this is for the security of a free state. According to the 1828 dictionary and other historical documents of the day, that independent state was actually seen as an independent nation. So it's important to understand that the Second Amendment was not about guaranteeing the right to a musket. It was about citizens of a sovereign state matching force with military. I talked with attorney Don Moore about this.
From a legal standpoint, and the way I was taught in law school, essentially, the purpose of that amendment was to allow us to defend our country and to defend ourselves against our country.
You see, this is where American history becomes very politically incorrect, because the Second Amendment was not drafted for hunting or just self-defense from an attacker. The Second Amendment was put in place to guarantee the rights of the individual to be equally armed as military, both foreign and domestic, in the event that the citizenry might actually at some point have to fight their own government.
Specifically, the purpose of the amendment was to have an armed society. Several examples in the 20th century where governments have perpetrated evil against its citizenry, some probably even in this century, 21st century. And it's very difficult to do that to an armed populace. To an unarmed populace, you can round them up, you can put them in ghettos, you can execute them, you can do all kinds of things when they're not armed.
So what this means for you, it's again a very controversial subject, but if we're going to have a debate about what rights are actually guaranteed under the Constitution, then we need to have an honest debate about what the founders were attempting to guarantee. The Second Amendment is about making sure the population would not be controlled, dominated, or oppressed by a government. It's not my place to attempt to tell you what the founders were thinking or what they be thinking today, but the principle of what they put in place had nothing to do with the kind of weapon they were guaranteeing. It was simply about matching force. And that is Reality Check. So to the question about why an AR-15 rifle. Follow me here. The framers believed in the right of free speech, but today most people believe that speech has limitations, obscene speech or hate speech. The framers believed in the right to keep and bear arms matching military force, but today the Supreme Court has ruled that you shouldn't be able to own an RPG or a tank. By extension, Piers Morgan says, an AR-15 rifle. The framers believed in the right to trial, but many Americans now for themselves believe that President Obama and Bush are okay by accusing some people of terrorism and not entitling them to that right to trial. That's why Piers Morgan and those who share his worldview will never fully understand the Constitution, because at the time the Bill of Rights were written, hate speech existed, but the framers believed the right of the individual was greater than the collective right of society. Terrorism and murder existed, but the framers believed that the right of the individual to have evidence brought against them in court was greater than the right of the mob. Firearms and weapons at the time of the founding existed, but the framers believed that the right of the individual to be armed was greater than the right of the government to control arms. Were the framers right? Are those calling for stricter controls today right? That's not for this journalist to decide. But until we accept there is a fundamental difference in worldview, both sides of this argument will continue to bang their heads against the wall. Thanks for being with us tonight. Have a great night. We'll see you back here next week.